Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, May 6th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside will reach a high of 77.5 degrees today, with a low of 50.5 degrees, making it a beautiful time to head outdoors. It is also National Nurses Day, a time to honor the incredible dedication of healthcare professionals who keep our communities healthy and safe. In our top stories, we examine the United States' evolving approach toward Iran and its intended shift from active offensive operations to a new diplomatic strategy. Additionally, we are reporting on why major book publishers have filed a lawsuit against Mark Zuckerberg personally regarding accusations of AI piracy. We have these stories, plus a roundup of other important events happening around the world. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're starting today with a major shift in the Middle East. The United States says its offensive military campaign against Iran is officially over, and now the focus turns to diplomacy and a fragile ceasefire. For the latest, we're joined by our reporter, Ethan. Ethan, good morning. Walk us through what was announced.
Good morning, Grace. So yesterday, May 5th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood at a White House press briefing and declared that Operation Epic Fury has achieved its core objectives. That was the high-intensity offensive campaign launched back on February 28th of this year. According to ABC News and the New York Times, the administration is now pivoting to what it calls a defensive posture. And alongside that, they're prioritizing a diplomatic settlement with Tehran.
Ethan, remind us what Operation Epic Fury actually set out to do.
It was a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign, with the Israeli side codenamed Operation Roaring Lion. The stated goal, according to Defense.gov and Al Jazeera, was to dismantle what officials called Iran's conventional shield. The numbers are staggering. About 38 days of major combat, more than 10,000 air sorties, and strikes on roughly 13,000 targets. Rubio says the mission neutralized the Iranian Navy and wiped out short-range ballistic missile capabilities and manufacturing sites.
Those are huge figures. What about the human cost on the ground?
It's been devastating, Grace. NPR and Britannica report that the opening strikes back in February killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with several senior military commanders. Beyond that, thousands have died and millions have been displaced across Iran, Lebanon, and Israel. And one strike in particular keeps drawing international scrutiny: an attack on a school in Minab that killed nearly 180 children. That incident has not gone away as a political flashpoint.
That's just heartbreaking. So if the offensive is over, what comes next militarily?
The U.S. military is transitioning into something called Project Freedom. Its mission is keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and protecting commercial shipping. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, in a press conference covered by Fox News and The Guardian, described it as a maritime security corridor and even called it, quote, a powerful red, white, and blue dome, end quote. The idea is round-the-clock overwatch for roughly 23,000 mariners who have been stranded by an Iranian blockade.
A maritime corridor sounds reassuring, but has it actually held up?
That's the real question. On May 4th, just 2 days ago, the Maltese-flagged container ship CMACGM San Antonio was struck by an Iranian cruise missile while under U.S. protection. Filipino crew members were injured. Hegseth insists, quote, the U.S.-Iran ceasefire is not over, end quote. But the maritime executive and Al Arabiya are reporting that Iranian drone and missile attacks have remained intense. So Iran's defensive capabilities are clearly still a lethal threat, even after 38 days of bombing.
And I understand the president made a surprise move last night.
He did. On the evening of May 5th, President Donald Trump announced a temporary pause of Project Freedom on social media. The White House is framing it as a humanitarian gesture to give negotiations room to breathe, with Pakistan helping mediate. But critics quoted in The Guardian and CNN are calling it something very different. They're describing it as a forced operational retreat after the failure to protect the CMACGM San Antonio.
Interesting framing on both sides. So who's actually leading the diplomacy here?
The point men are Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff working as envoys. According to the Times of Israel and CBS News, they're finalizing a one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding designed to end the war. The headline terms are pretty significant. There's a 12 to 15-year freeze on Iranian uranium enrichment, the release of billions in frozen Iranian assets, the lifting of oil sanctions, and a mutual lifting of restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz.
That's a lot on the table. How is Tehran responding?
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has publicly dismissed some of the terms as, quote, unrealistic, end quote. But the Iranian Foreign Ministry says it is evaluating the proposal, which is a meaningful signal. A formal response is expected to come through Pakistani mediators by Friday, May 8th, so that's just 2 days from now. Until then, the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports remains in full force and effect.
Let's turn to Washington, because I hear there's a constitutional fight brewing.
A serious one, Grace. The Spokesman Review and MSNNW are reporting that the 60-day statutory deadline under the War Powers Resolution of 1973 expired last Friday on May 1st. So the timing of Rubio's announcement is no accident. House Foreign Affairs Committee ranking member Gregory Meeks and other Democrats are accusing the administration of, quote, legal gymnastics, end quote. Their argument is that you can't declare offensive operations over while continuing Project Freedom and call it compliance.
How is the administration defending that position?
Rubio went further than most expected. He flatly dismissed the War Powers Resolution as, quote, 100% unconstitutional, end quote. That drew sharp pushback even from Republicans. Senator Rand Paul and Senator Susan Collins both raised concerns about the lack of a clear exit strategy. So this isn't a clean partisan fight, it's a real institutional clash over who gets to decide when a war ends.
Ethan, let's go back to the original justification. Why did this war start in the first place?
That's where the debate gets really pointed. The administration's case for war rested on something called the Geneva Boast. Iranian negotiators allegedly claimed they had enough enriched uranium to produce a weapon within 10 days. That became the core casus belli. But reports from Arms Control Today and Al Monitor reveal a significant split inside the intelligence community about whether that claim was credible.
A split? What were the doubts?
DNI Tulsi Gabbard and IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi had previously assessed that Iran's enrichment capabilities were largely obliterated during a prior 2025 operation called Midnight Hammer. They also said there was no evidence of a structured nuclear weapons program. Analysts at the Stimson Center are now calling this a war of choice, rather than a response to an imminent threat. And you're hearing comparisons to the 2003 Iraq WMD case in nearly every analysis piece.
That's a powerful comparison. So where does all of this stand right now?
As of today, May 6th, the world is essentially waiting on Tehran. The blockade is still in place, Project Freedom is paused but ready to resume, and that 14-point peace plan is sitting with Iranian officials. Rubio has warned that if the diplomatic window closes, the United States is prepared to resume offensive operations with overwhelming force. So the next 48 hours, leading into Friday's expected response, could really determine whether this war ends or reignites.
And quickly, Ethan, what should our viewers be watching for between now and Friday?
3 things, I'd say. First, any signal from Pakistani mediators about how Tehran is leaning. Second, whether the ceasefire actually holds in the Strait of Hormuz, because another incident like the CMA-CGM San Antonio could collapse the talks. And third, whether Congress decides to push back harder on the war powers question. Any one of those could shift the entire trajectory.
Ethan, thank you so much for that thorough breakdown. We'll be watching closely as Friday approaches. That was our reporter Ethan with the latest on the conclusion of Operation Epic Fury and the diplomatic push to end the war with Iran. We'll be right back with our next story. Welcome back. A blockbuster legal fight is brewing between the publishing world and one of the biggest names in tech. Yesterday, a coalition of major publishers and best-selling author Scott Turow filed a class action lawsuit against Meta Platforms and Mark Zuckerberg himself. Our tech reporter Chloe has been digging into the complaint. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. This one is enormous, and it landed yesterday, May 5th, in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. The official case name is Elsevier Inc. et al. Versus Meta Platforms Inc. and Mark Zuckerberg. At its core, the publishers say Meta trained its llama language models on millions of pirated books and journal articles. And they claim Zuckerberg personally signed off on it to win what they call the AI arms race.
Wow. So who exactly are the plaintiffs lining up against Meta here?
According to NPR and WRAL, you've got 5 major publishing houses leading the charge. That's Elsevier, Cengage, Hachette Book Group, Macmillan, and McGraw-Hill. They're joined by Scott Turow, who wrote Presumed Innocent and used to lead the Authors Guild, along with his company, SCRIBE. And the proposed class is sweeping. It would cover any legal owner of a registered copyright for a book with an ISBN or a journal article with a DOI or ISSN.
That's a huge tent. Are there particular authors or titles called out in the filing?
Yes, and the list reads like a bestseller shelf. The complaint names works by James Patterson, Donna Tartt, former President Joe Biden, and recent Pulitzer Prize winners Yoon Lee and Amanda Vale. Specific titles described as stolen include Turow's Presumed Innocent, Douglas Preston's Impact, Peter Brown's The Wild Robot, N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season, and Lemony Snicket's Who Could That Be at This Hour? It's a striking cross-section of literary and commercial fiction.
And what's so unusual about naming Mark Zuckerberg personally as a defendant?
Legal experts are calling it piercing the corporate veil, which is rare in cases like this. The Orange County Register reports that the complaint alleges Zuckerberg, quote, personally authorized and actively encouraged, end quote, the infringement. The publishers argue Meta lived up to its old motto, move fast and break things, by skipping legal licensing markets and turning to what they call shadow libraries. Naming the CEO directly raises the personal stakes considerably.
Is there a paper trail behind that allegation, or is it more inference?
There's a detailed internal narrative in the complaint. Between January and April of 2023, Meta's business development team reportedly proposed expanding the company's dataset licensing budget from $17 million to $200 million. But the lawsuit says the decision was, quote, escalated to MZ, end quote, in April of 2023. At that point, Zuckerberg allegedly gave verbal instructions to halt licensing negotiations altogether.
That's a striking reversal. Any direct quotes from inside Meta?
One memo cited by NPR is especially eye-catching. A Meta employee reportedly wrote, quote, if we license once single book, we won't be able to lean into the fair use strategy, end quote. In other words, paying for even one title might undercut their legal defense down the road. That's the kind of internal candor that tends to resonate with juries.
Let's talk about how Meta allegedly got the books in the first place. What does the lawsuit say about that?
This is where it gets very technical. Meta has historically pointed to open-source datasets like Books 3, but the plaintiffs say the company moved toward outright willful piracy for newer models like Llama 3 and 3.1. According to discovery documents referenced by The Washington Post and The Guardian, Meta servers allegedly downloaded 134.6 terabytes of data via BitTorrent between April and July of 2024. And they're accused of seeding, meaning uploading, more than 40 terabytes back into the network.
Seeding is significant because that means Meta wasn't just taking, but redistributing too?
Exactly, and that's a big legal wrinkle. The complaint identifies the sources as notorious pirate sites, specifically LibGen, Sci-Hub, and Anna's Archive. It also accuses Meta of using Amazon Web Services and masked IP addresses to hide that the traffic was coming from Facebook servers. And on top of that, the company allegedly ran scripts to strip out copyright management information, things like author names and titles, before feeding the works into the AI.
That sounds deliberate. Hasn't Meta already faced a similar case, though?
It has, and that backstory is crucial. In June of 2025, Judge Vince Chabria dismissed a similar case called Cadre versus Meta. He ruled that the plaintiffs hadn't provided empirical evidence of market harm. So this new lawsuit is essentially a strategic do-over, designed to close that evidentiary gap.
How are the publishers trying to prove market harm this time?
They're calling Llama an, quote, infinite substitution machine, end quote, that causes market dilution. The argument is that when Llama summarizes or paraphrases scientific journals and textbooks, it directly competes with products that already have a licensing market. Companies like News Corp and Reddit have struck real licensing deals, so the value of that market is documented. That's a sharper economic theory than the earlier Cadre case, which focused mostly on fiction.
And there was that big Anthropic settlement last year too, right?
Right, and the publishers are leaning hard on it. In 2025, Anthropic agreed to pay $1.5 billion to settle a class action brought by authors Andrea Bartz, Charles Graeber, and Kirk Wallace Johnson. Judge William Alsup drew an important line in that case. He said, training an AI could be transformative, but building a central library from pirated sources was, quote, inherently infringing, end quote. That distinction is exactly the wedge the publishers want to drive here.
How is Meta responding to all of this?
Meta has vowed to fight the lawsuit aggressively. Spokesperson Nkechi Neji and other representatives say AI is, quote, powering transformative innovations, end quote, and that courts have frequently found training on copyrighted material qualifies as fair use. But as of today, May 6th, neither Meta nor Zuckerberg has specifically addressed the leaked internal documents about the $200 million budget, or the so-called Project Panama communications. That silence on the specifics is conspicuous.
What kind of relief are the publishers actually asking the court for?
They're seeking three big things. First, statutory damages for millions of individual infringements, which could total billions of dollars. Second, a permanent injunction to stop any further use of their works. And third, and this is the dramatic one, a court order requiring the destruction of all infringing copies, including the AI models that were trained on that data.
Destroying the models themselves? That would be extraordinary.
It really would. Imagine a court ordering Meta to delete versions of Llama because of how they were built. That's the kind of remedy that would send shockwaves through the entire AI industry, not just Meta. It signals the publishers aren't just looking for a payday, they want to reset the rules.
So what's the broader stakes here for the tech and creative industries?
This case is expected to set a definitive precedent on a pretty fundamental question. Can tech giants bypass established commercial licensing markets just by claiming the transformative nature of AI training excuses the use of pirated material? If the publishers win, expect a wave of new licensing deals and possibly retraining of major AI systems. If Meta wins, the fair use doctrine becomes a much wider doorway than anyone imagined.
And quickly, why does naming Zuckerberg personally matter beyond the headlines?
Because it changes the calculus of settlement and discovery. If Zuckerberg stays in as an individual defendant, his personal communications, his calendar, his decision-making could all become part of the record. That's a level of exposure most CEOs work very hard to avoid, and it puts pressure on Meta to consider a deal rather than risk that kind of disclosure.
Fascinating story, and one we'll be following closely. Chloe, thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
Happy to, Grace. We'll see where this lands.
That was our tech reporter, Chloe. We'll be right back after the break. Here are some other headlines. The forecast is looking cloudy for federal weather agencies, currently in the eye of a budget storm. National weather forecasters report multiple tornado outbreaks blew past expectations, leaving experts winded due to significant data gaps. The National Weather Service deflated its plans, canceling weather balloon launches as Administrator Dr. Neil Jacobs defended cuts, and Director Ken Graham tried to keep the agency nimble despite a 20% staff reduction since 2025. This is stormy news for Illinois, which recorded 119 tornadoes this year. Today, the Storm Prediction Center is raising the roof, issuing a Level 3 enhanced risk for northern Louisiana, central Mississippi, and central Alabama. Meteorologists warn that kneecapping agencies risks lives while the privatization of weather services looms. Across the Pacific, military relations are making a splash. Exercise Bala-Katan 4126 has reached a high water mark as the largest ever joint drill between the United States and the Philippines. 17,000 troops from nations including Australia, Canada, France, Japan, and New Zealand are weathering the storm. Japan made a striking debut by firing Type 88 anti-ship missiles at a decommissioned target ship, while the U.S. military conducted the first live fire of the Typhoon missile system from a civilian airport in Leyte. The Space Force also sent Guardians to ensure satellite communications stay out of this world. These maneuvers near the Luzon Strait and the West Philippine Sea are a real sea change, serving as a multilateral dress rehearsal for conflict. In Washington, the Senate is having a ballroom blitz. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley and fellow Republicans proposed a $1 billion security package for the Secret Service following an April 25 assassination attempt on President Donald Trump. While funds are for security, they are tied to a 90,000-square-foot ballroom project that has the National Trust for Historic Preservation feeling the walls closing in. This legislation is part of a larger $72 billion package for immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection, setting the stage for a real dance-off during next week's markup. Overseas, prospects for peace hit a drone. Russia shot down a ceasefire proposed by President Zelensky, launching a large-scale assault instead. Moscow's forces sent 108 drones and 3 missiles into Ukraine, striking Kharkiv and Zaporizhia and causing 1 death in the Sumy region. Russia claimed to have intercepted 53 drones themselves and dismissed a brief May 8 and 9 truce as a public relations exercise. While leaders like Johann Wadephul and Donald Tusk gave the ceasefire a leg up, the Kremlin's rejection signals a cold shoulder as the conflict enters its 5th year. Meanwhile, the U.S. has its sights set elsewhere, prioritizing a separate conflict with Iran. Finally, in Ohio, a biotech entrepreneur is finding his second wind. Vivek Ramaswamy secured a victory in the Republican gubernatorial primary with 82% of the vote. Ramaswamy outpaced auto racing engineer Casey Putsch and is gearing up for a high-speed election against Amy Acton to succeed Mike DeWine. With a $31 million war chest, including $25 million of his own funds, Ramaswamy is campaigning on property tax rollbacks and university consolidation in a race that is a real cash cow. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.